Good evening and welcome. I'm Anne Broadbridge, Chair of the Department of History at UMass Amherst. I'd like to begin this evening by acknowledging that our university community stands on Nonotuck land. And I acknowledge our neighboring indigenous nations, the Nipmuc and the Wampanoag to the east, the Mohegan and Pequot to the south, the Mohican to the west, and the Abenaki to the north. It is my pleasure to welcome you to tonight's lecture by the internationally recognized historian, cultural critic, and public advocate, Dr. Davarian L. Baldwin, Distinguished Professor of American Studies at Trinity College in Hartford, Connecticut. His talk is entitled, "Are Universities Good for Our Communities? Assessing the Past and Forging a New Path Forward." Professor Baldwin's lecture is also the keynote to and opening launch of the 2024-25 Feinberg Family Distinguished Lecture Series. With the generous support of attorney Ken Feinberg, we offer this series every other year here in the Department of History at UMass Amherst. Each iteration of the series focuses on a big issue of clear and compelling concern. Then, as a history department, we ground that concern in historical context and provide our expert analysis and collective experience, or that of our invited guests, artists, and speakers. This year's Feinberg Family Lecture Series is called "What Are Universities For? Struggles for the Soul of Higher Education," and it explores the historical roots of the present-day political, economic, and ethical crises in higher education. I invite you to visit our website, which has been on the screen, www.umass.edu/Feinberg. There you can read about and register for our upcoming events, including our next event on October 9th, which is a lecture by Rutgers University professor Timothy Eatman on the harms caused by legacies of slavery and colonialism in academia, as well as what possibilities exist to repair those harms. On our website, you'll also find recordings of each event, information about affiliated courses, an upcoming exhibit on the history of student activism at UMass, and you will also find information about open classroom days in our course, our departmental course, The Power of Universities, which is being taught by tonight's moderator, whom you'll meet in just a moment, Professor Ashish Kapoor Siddique. So for all UMass and 5 college students in the audience, open classroom days means particular sessions of Professor Siddique's class to which you are warmly invited. Now, for those students and for everyone else in the audience, Professor Siddique is an assistant professor here in the UMass History Department. He is one of the co-directors of this year's Feinberg series, and he happens to be the author of a newly published book, The Archive of Empire, which just came out with Yale University Press. So students, don't you want to sit in on his class? I do. Now, before we begin, and I pass the mic to Professor Siddique to introduce tonight's guest, Professor Baldwin, a few logistical notes, and of course some gratitude, are in order. First, logistics. If you're here tonight on Zoom, live closed captioning is available. You can find information in the chat about how to enable it. If you're here tonight as part of a university course, be sure to use the sign-in sheets in the chat or in the foyer, and make sure you earn credit for attending. As for the gratitude, I'd like to thank the 36 university partners who are co-sponsoring this series, and the list has been up behind me, and as you can see, it's really long, so I'm not going to read it all, but we're grateful to every single one of them. This includes departments, programs, and initiatives across UMass and the 5 colleges, including the Commonwealth Honors College, the Graduate School, and the College of Humanities and Fine Arts, the College of Social and Behavioral Sciences, and the College of Education. Finally, I thank my colleagues in the History Department who organized this series, and whose tireless work and dedication has brought us here tonight to hear Professor Baldwin's stimulating words. Finally, we might say in the place of honor, so last, definitely not least, I thank the esteemed American attorney and UMass History Department alumnus, Kenneth R. Feinberg, 67, whose generosity and dedication to public intellectual discussion and debate makes this series possible. Thank you. And now I'm happy to welcome to the stage Professor Ashish Kapoor Siddique, who will be introducing our speaker.
Thank you, Professor Broadridge. Good evening and welcome to the keynote and opening event of the UMass Amherst History Department's 2024 to 2025 Feinberg Family Distinguished Lecture Series. What are universities for? Struggles for the Soul of Higher Education. I'm Ashish Kapoor Siddique, Assistant Professor of History here at UMass and co-chair of the Feinberg series. Tonight's event is the first in a series that will span the entire academic year, and I encourage you to check out the Feinberg series website for more information. Tonight, we are profoundly honored to have Dr. Davarian Baldwin deliver the keynote lecture of the series. Dr. Baldwin is an internationally recognized historian, cultural critic, and public advocate. He is the Paul E. Rather Distinguished Professor of American Studies and founding director of the Smart Cities Lab at Trinity College in Hartford, Connecticut. Professor Baldwin's academic and political commitments have focused on global cities and particularly the diverse and marginalized communities that struggle to maintain sustainable lives in urban locales. He is the award-winning author of several books, most recently, In the Shadow of the Ivory Tower, How Universities Are Plundering Our Cities, and he has served as the consultant and text author for The World of the Harlem Renaissance, a Jigsaw Puzzle. His commentaries and opinions have been featured in numerous outlets from NBC News, BBC, and Hulu to USA Today, The Washington Post, and Time Magazine. Professor Baldwin was named a 2022 Freedom Scholar by the Margaret Casey Foundation for his work in racial and economic justice. After Professor Baldwin's lecture, we will have a Q&A with questions from both the in-person audience, who are invited to line up at the mics, and from the many people around the world who are watching this event on Zoom, who are invited to submit questions via the chat. And after the event, Professor Baldwin will be signing copies of In the Shadow of the Ivory Tower, which will be available to purchase courtesy of Amherst Books. And if you're a student, you can also enter a raffle to win a free copy of the book. And with that, I am so excited to welcome Professor Davarian Baldwin.
Good evening, everybody. Good evening. All right. So hello to everybody out in person and in Zoom land. It's a pleasure to be here. I want to thank Professor Siddique, the History Department more broadly, the leadership and all the 30-plus partners across the 5 colleges who have helped to make this possible. It really is a blessing to be here. And hopefully you will see that it's timely. This discussion is quite timely for the moment that we are in, that we have been in, that we will continue to be in, and God bless us, right, as we move forward. So the question for today's conversation is, or the discussion is organized around the question is higher education good for our communities? Assessing the past and forging a new path forward. So, when we think about the current crisis in today's higher education, one of the critical ideas or targets for the roots of that crisis has been this notion of corporatization. This general idea that marks the increased industrial or for-profit ambitions imposing themselves on various aspects of university life. Indicators range from soaring tuition costs, matched with ballooning student debt, a shift to contingent non-tenured faculty over tenured faculty, the erosion of academic freedom in the name of brand management, armies of board of trustees or governors or whatever you call them at your state institutions filled with financiers and other money mark makers, the hoarding of university endowments and money market accounts, the greater emphasis on the profitability of STEM research and the shrinkage of humanities and the social sciences, the rise of online learning and real estate development in the name of innovation. And finally, last but not least, the greater emphasis and struggle over endowments with the larger call for disclose and divest with the destruction of encampments all over the country and now world in the name of brand management and keeping donors happy. Right? These are the markers of what we have signposted shorthanded as corporatization, the capture of higher education by corporate interests and a corporate logic with all of these various fallouts and streams. A powerful index, a powerful indictment. But the question becomes, for me as at least partially historian, is my students don't get that, but faculty will laugh at that. But anyway, we love disciplinary boundaries as professors. So the part of me the historian brings to the conversation is this alarm is symptomatic, it's captivating, it's striking, but is it actually accurate? This notion of corporatization in the current formulations, as powerful as it is, moves on a very particular kind of presupposition, presumption. The idea here underneath this notion of corporatization is the idea that there was ever some pure university system that then got corrupted or captured by corporate logic. Is that the story? Well, I have 35 minutes, so obviously you know it's not the story. So if we move forward, we have to move back to understand that this notion of corporatization has always run parallel or in concert, not parallel, in concert with the logic of higher education from this institution's founding. And at the center is something that us academics like to call racial capitalism. Big word, we'll talk about what it means in a minute. Very clearly, we talk about racial capitalism or the intersection between race and capital exploitation is found at the institution of higher education, at higher education's founding. This is to the upper right, this is the academical village, the sine qua non of higher education at the University of Virginia. This capture, this image, this icon of intellectual cosmopolitanism and freedom, all underwritten by slavery. Like almost every university in this country, North and South. But of course, we have the discussion in the North, we have these ceremonies of discovery and shock at every discovery. Oh, that name building, they were a slaveholder? Oh, that early funder with the picture on the wall, they were a merchant in the Caribbean? Oh, the intimate relationship between corporatization or an economic logic and higher education is embedded in the roots of the institution at its founding. Or we can go forward a little bit to the 1862 and 1890 Moral Land Grant Acts, celebrated as creating land grant institutions like, say it with me, the University of Massachusetts, right? Moving away from the elitism of schools like Trinity College and Harvard and Amherst and other schools towards a more democratic access to education. But they won't tell you that part of that was to retrain workers or agricultural workers to be ready for industrialization, corporatization, yeah? But let's even get deeper. The Moral Land Grant Acts, that notion is predicated on the idea that this land somewhere was acquired, I'm putting all these words in scare quotes, right? Somewhere and acquired, and became the funding, the land acquisition and selling to states of the land, use that land as capital to create the endowments of land grant institutions like the University of Massachusetts. Now, of course, the understory of that is that these 10.7 million acres of land that was gifted to various states to build land grant institutions was actually indigenous land that was taken, seized, or manipulated through corrupt land deals and then transferred to these states. So in the current moment, thanks to High Country News and other activists and scholars, we shift the language from land grant to land grab universities. What am I saying here? The point here is that before we can even have the conversation about the present, and it's a particular dynamic of the moment of corporatization. The point here is that this didn't come out of nowhere. Again, embedded in the foundations of the institution of higher education. Does that mean that higher education is irredeemable? Let's talk. So, these are the historical roots of the conversation about corporatization and the current crisis. But as many people do, I want to draw your attention more directly to the mid-20th century. The point being here is that in 1967 and 1968, Senator J. William Fulbright in California at Stanford rallied against what he called, say it with me, the military industrial, stop, the military industrial, you can't read that, academic complex. No, that's not a cute scholarly reinvention. This is an archival document. We love those, right, historians? Right? The Stanford Cardinal newspaper has a transcription of Fulbright's speech when he's rallying against the rise of the military-industrial academic complex in 1967. What did he mean by that? Talking about the growing wartime intimacy, World War II, post-war, Cold War, intimacy between government, the defense industry, and university life. Sound familiar? No? Okay? Our universities and research and development that underwrites the weaponry that's going where? Are we scared to say it? Where's the weapons going? Israel. Yes. Right? And then the full-scale, real-time destruction of all higher education institutions across the land. In other words, what we call scholasticide. And then the blowback of that scholasticide on our campuses, because the very same police that are beating our heads were trained by who? IDF trainers. So the roots of this current moment can be found in 1967 with the notion of the military-industrial academic complex. You with me? You tracking? Okay. So, going into this period, this critical period of 1960s and 70s a little bit further, this process of industrialization was happening at the same time that we witnessed a defunding of higher education that would celebrate or accelerate what we call the corporatization of higher education. School, at the same time that we were ramping up in research and development for military industrial weaponry, states and school leaders began to ring the alarm about the growing presence in politics of women, working class students, and students of color. What was going on this time period? Stephen knows. The rise of black studies, the very presence of black, brown students, women students, what we today call queer students, changing the complexion, literally, and the questions that are being asked in the classroom that then gave rise to black studies, women's studies, ethnic studies. But it didn't stop there. They began to protest the expansions of universities into longstanding communities. They began to protest the research and development that was being used for the Vietnam War coming from universities. And lawmakers and state officials said, oh shit, we got to stop that, right? Students, you will be interested to know this story I'm about to tell you. How did they stop it? How did they try to stop it? Well, do you know Ronald Reagan? Do we know who that is, young people? Okay, he's celebrated everywhere. I'm gonna give you a different story. When Ronald Reagan was the governor of California at the time when Berkeley, or the Bay Area, was the founding of the Black Panther Party of Self-Defense, Black Studies at San Francisco State University, the free speech movement at Berkeley, he was like, we gotta stop this, right? So he marshaled his education secretary to begin a process to stop what he called the danger of producing an educated proletariat. How do they factor or manage to do that? Well, if you didn't know this, in the 1960s and 70s or 60s, state schools were either free or damn near free. 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 Say it with me. Free. Free. So the way that this governor and his secretary of education wanted to stop the danger of educated proletariat is by charging tuition. And then when Reagan moved further and further up the ranks and created and had a hand, amongst others, the Higher Education Act moved from direct grants to what? What are we all burdened with today? Loans, right? Student loans, right? Aha. So that's part of the story. So the point here is that your burdening with student loans was not a financial decision. It was a political one. A way to keep the wrong people out of the halls of higher education by making the point of access that much more difficult to achieve. And at the same time, those state lawmakers began to directly defund higher education. In the 1970s, most public schools, like UMass, their annual budget was funded by the state at up to 70%. Today, there are some state schools that are only funded at 7%. 7. Not 17, not 27, 7. Making these schools only public in name only, which then creates a number of ripple effects, which include the ballooning weight of student debt, the shift of universities to figure out other ways to become entrepreneurial. We know this story. We know this language of having to become more entrepreneurial. In its early iterations, what that meant was state schools beginning to recruit more out-of-state students than in-state students. Why? Why? And also international students. Higher tuition. Because, quiet as it's kept, public schools in states only exist, both public and private schools, including Amherst College and Trinity College, only exist because of a state charter to serve the public good. So the trick of public schools, who had a greater burden of state charter, is to shift away from bringing in state students from the state and recruiting students out of state internationally. This was a big concern during the pandemic. Also, with this came leaving students with higher tuitions, leaving them prey to predatory financial loan systems. So not what I had as a first gen, a Stafford loan or a Perkins loan, those don't even exist anymore in the same degree. We have private market loans with higher percentage rates that have interest rates that are not deferred while you're in school, but what? Some of those students, you know, hopefully you know, your parents know, those interest rates run now while you're even in school. Am I boring you in the weeds? Are you tracking with me about the consequences? Okay. All right. And so that's one part of the consequences. Another part is the rise of contingency faculty without tenure. Today, 70% of people that are teaching you do not have job security. 70% of the faculty teaching you do not have job security. Where at one point in time, it was like 25 or 30%. There's been a total flip-flop. Tenure for you students and what you hear in the public media, tenure does not mean you can't get fired. Tenure means you have to have probable cause. So you can still get fired with tenure. Let's be clear about that. It's hard to get fired, but you have to have probable cause. But the nice thing about tenure is that it provides, at least it did provide, that's coming under fire right now, it provides academic freedom. The right and capacity to study and research and speak about things without the threat of censure. But wait a minute, if tenure provides that, and 70% of people that are teaching you don't have tenure, what does that mean? Schools don't have what? Academic freedom, right? So currently, most of the people that you are teaching you are glorified Uber drivers. In terms of, not in terms of their capacity, let me be clear, in terms of their pay and their health benefits and their security, their job security, right? But it's not just students that are facing debt. Also, universities are taking on tons of debt. As schools begin to try to get different out-of-state students to come to their school versus that school, they're beginning to take on rock climbing walls, lazy rivers, #1 rated cafeterias in the nation, right? Because students aren't picking based on professors. They're picking based on the bennies. What we scholars call the amenities arms race is going on right now to get you to come here versus going there. That has nothing to do with classes. And to pay for all this, schools are going into enormous debt. That is getting passed on to who? You. Right? It definitely ain't going in our pockets. I mean, this is a nice suit, I know, but it ain't going to our pockets, right? And in the process, credit rating agencies like Moody's and Fitch have become de facto governors where rating scales of universities not only become institutional lifelines, but also shape the highly coveted school rankings, which attract paying students. Where do your parents go at first, many of them, when they want to look at where you go to school? U.S. News and World Report, right? And what I'm saying is that those rankings have very little to do with classroom instruction and more to do with these amenities and the Moody's and Fitch ranking systems, which are increasingly generated not by instruction, but more profit-centered focus on a school's branding strength, a school's ability to unilaterally raise tuition, And finally, a key lever in the ranking of a school based on Moody's and Fitch is the weakness of its faculty unions. So they can get stuff done without that nasty thing called democracy. Right? These are the institutions that you are living, working, playing. We know the old names, UMass, right? Partying in, right? And then finally, schools are investing in what we call exploitative real estate development, which was the focus of my latest work, In the Shadow of the Ivory Tower. These non-educational ways in which universities and their medical centers are trying to build up entrepreneurship to make up for all the things we just outlined in ways that have nothing to do with teaching classes and have profound impacts not just on students, but on host communities like the town of Amherst, or the south side of Chicago, or North St. Louis, or South Central LA, or the Black Bottom, Philadelphia, or rural Pennsylvania, where the satellite schools are for the Pennsylvania state system, or my home state in Oshkosh or Superior in the University of Wisconsin system. That the fallout of this corporatization is multifold, and it ain't just about the classroom. It's not just about the campus. As the university provides and creates these innovative ways to recoup and build entrepreneurship that has fallout effects for you and faculty, for students and faculty, but goes far beyond students, faculty, and students. Why is this important? Because in my book, I talk about how the impacts of higher education's corporate capture extends beyond the main campus. It's right before our eyes. These institutions of higher learning, we're living in the midst of them. They're becoming these powerful forces in our name. Schools have become the biggest low-wage employers in whole cities and sometimes whole regions. Schools have become the biggest healthcare providers in whole cities, communities, and regions. Schools have become the biggest real estate owners in whole cities, towns, and regions. And finally, but last but not least, schools have become the biggest policing agents in towns, cities, and communities all across the country, and this model is being exported across the world. This is what I mean by UniverCities. The growing influence and control, economic development, and political governance power of institutions of higher learning. Schools. With profound consequences for both people on the campus and beyond the campus. And with the question of what good are universities for our communities in the mind, at the center of that story is this notion of the public good. Because in building out these non-educational amenities and forces and realities, we have to talk a little bit about, well, what's happened in society more broadly to give universities this kind of power? In today's political economy, we've seen, at least in the global north, the fall of the house of factories. Have factories disappeared? No. Everything you got on your body is made in a factory. But they've been exported or moved to the global south. But in the global north, we've seen the decline of an industrial manufacturing economy and the rise of, appropriately, what we call a knowledge economy, which puts universities and their laboratories and their medical centers at the center of today's society. The quaint notion of the Ivory Tower is dead, y'all. because it's in the knowledge economy where the research and development that happens on campuses is converted into intellectual property and pioneers and powers the top industries of the day in pharmaceuticals, software design, military industrial weaponry, and health sciences. These are the top industries in our society today, and the R&D for that work happens where? Right here in public and private universities, which gives universities an unprecedented level of power as today's smokestacks. No longer the cathedrals of learning, but today's factories. And who are the workers? Y'all, all of y'all. You are the frontline workers. We are dealing with an entirely new and different, well, not entirely new, because I would betray my own claims earlier about slavery and the Moral Act, but a heightened level of university power in today's political economy. Now, part of that development is the building out of what have been called, this is a company name, this is a patented name by Wexford Science Technology, which is a real estate developer that exclusively partners with universities to build out the real estate developments. I'll tell you why in a minute. Tax exemption. We'll get to that in a minute. But they build out what we call knowledge communities because key to bringing together students that pay tuition and graduate students that do research and development in the laboratories and faculty that serve as principal investigators and the investors from Eli Lilly or Google or Bombardier or Pfizer that dump money into university laboratories. All of that has to be powered by people, researchers, faculty, students, and their families. So after decades of telling people to don't go to university towns or neighborhoods in cities where universities sit, like the South Side of Chicago, or SWAT in Atlanta, or Overtown in Miami, these are precisely where universities are. So what had to happen? These neighborhood blocks had to be retrofitted for corporate capture. The conversion of neighborhood blocks into knowledge communities, where you can combine research and housing and retail and laboratories and nightlife and create a fully developed university experience to get people to live, work, and play on these blocks that were previously seen as dangerous. But most importantly, to work. You get what I'm saying? All in the name, on the surface, of university life. All in the name and reality of hardcore productivity in today's political economy. At basement prices. Bargain basement prices. How so? How? How is it cheap? How is it financially beneficial to have all this investment and work and to have a captive market of students where you can test out your surveillance equipment? You can sell your paraphernalia, your educational software. You can try it out in the captive market. All the Chick-fil-A and Five Guys you can eat. All the Lululemon and Abercrombie & Fitch you can wear. You're captive. You're a test market. Why is that important? Because it's all been talked about being done in the name of the public good. Let's bring this story. So right on the board here, on the screen, you have Bakery Square in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Anybody can see what that name is at the top of that spire? If you can't see it, you know the colors. Google, right? A previously marginalized community turned into a knowledge community or an innovation district that brings together corporate partners and university research in previously marginalized communities. On the right is in Hyde Park, Chicago, Harper Court, doing the same thing. These are all over the country these configurations of retail, research and development, IP, royalties coming back to the school. This is everywhere, including where? Including where? Here. Right here. Right here. While framed as a sleepy college town, this flagship university has been building its own city right in the heart of the Pioneer Valley. A signature showpiece of property of this latest building spree is the Institute for Applied Life Sciences. This $150 million institute prides itself on fostering ties between research and industry, or what it describes as turning innovative ideas into results. Following the trends of many universities in today's knowledge economy, IALS coordinates with other units on campus like the Feinberg School of Management Business Innovation Hub, which is the word you're going to hear over and over again. Innovation just means simply, can you turn your research into money? They ain't going to tell you that. That's what it means, right? Together, these configurations facilitate enterprising academics and their low-wage graduate students, and sometimes even undergraduate students, who can steward translations of their work into lucrative startups and IP to the benefit of the university. To come back to the university once it's sold into the open market, to come back to the university in the form of royalties, to make up for the defunding of higher education, and to grow the brand. This is the dynamic of the new landscape. This is at the roots of the so-called current crisis. You need to understand this, right? And the driving idea of this notion is the notion that higher education is a public good. The notion of the public good is doing a lot of work here in these institutions that actually demonstrate the degree to which even the notion of corporatization is limited in what it can explain in terms of the power of institutions. Let me tell you how real quickly. Off the top, we presume that schools are an inherent public good, most clearly marked by their tax code status of 501c3 nonprofits. Because universities and the medical centers are nonprofits, 501c3s, what does that mean? It means that all the properties that are affiliated with educational purposes are property tax exempt. So if you live in a town like Amherst, and most of your properties are controlled or owned by universities or colleges, all of those properties are taken off the tax rolls. So when you calculate, and you won't know this because you don't own homes, when you calculate, what I do, when you calculate your mill rate, which determines how much you're going to pay in property taxes, they don't get factored in, and the burden for paying for public schools, public services, snow removal, trash removal, electrical grid, all gets passed on to the remaining property owners that do pay taxes. Right? This is all made possible because the idea is that schools are doing something that the state would have to pay for, education. So in exchange for providing that service, the idea was, we'll reward you with property tax exempt status. But in today's new knowledge economy, that tax exempt status has taken on a profoundly monstrous role that many people probably could not, well, many of us, people did. People could not anticipate. What has this meant? That basically, in basic terms, what happens is that the status of being an education institution and doing work on the tax code that's named educational purposes means that if you have a Google or a Bombardier or a Pfizer or Eli Lilly or a third-party investor doing its work on this campus, these campus blocks serve for them as a financial shelter. They know it's to their benefit to put their R&D where? On the campus and not in the city, because it reduces overhead costs of property taxes. That's just one part. And they all also say, hell yeah, let's be at a school, because the same people with a bachelor's degree in computer science or in biochemistry that I would hire directly in my company, I can hire where? At the school, but they are a graduate student, which means they are an apprentice. And so even if they produce new research, they're still going to get the same stipend. Cheap labor, right? Property tax exemption, cheap labor, recruiting international students to work here on a work or student visa. So if they protest, if they contest the work conditions of being exploited in their work, what happens? They get deported. This is a perfect setup for outside corporate investors. This knowledge economy and the educational purposes designation of universities in the tax code. So my point here is that corporatization is a cool term, bro, but it doesn't even capture the full extent of these dynamics because schools are able to do some things that corporations can't even do. This is why corporations are here. Do you see what I'm saying? And then on top of that, so then you have, say, a Google. Take a couple $1 million, contribute it to a university. Tax write-off, educational donation. Right? That money goes to the university. The school pays for a principal investigator and an army of graduate students at a reduced rate. And then a big chunk of that money goes to the university in this amorphous category called overhead costs. Right? Faculty get their research paid for. Some students get research, but at low basement rates. So benefits for the third-party investor. Benefits for the school. Exploitation for the students. And even greater exploitation for the host community. Because the taxes that the school is not paying sucks the life out of the city budget where the university sits. This is why in 2016, the New Jersey community of Witherspoon-Jackson sued Princeton University when they realized that their property taxes were going up, but no improvements were being made. They're like, why is that? Oh, because we sit next to tax-exempt Princeton University buildings that are conducting multi-million-dollar research for the pharmaceutical giant Eli Lilly. They got so mad, they sued Princeton and won an $18 million lawsuit for tax compensation. One resident was so disgusted by what he found out, he dismissed Princeton as a hedge fund that conducts classes. But just so you don't think it's just the leafy green elite Ivy League schools, let's turn to Arizona. Arizona State University, in the Wild Wild West, they realized that their land was tax exempt, and there were even fewer protections around real estate in Arizona. So the largest private development in the state of Arizona, the regional headquarters for State Farm Insurance, sits where? On ASU land, because that land is tax exempt and it reduces the overhead costs for State Farm Insurance. Ain't got nothing to do. Don't even have to make claims on educational purposes because it's Arizona. But don't think these things are happening right here. It's just slick language to make claims that that travel agency or that lab that's sending out R&D to a private company for profit is serving educational purposes. They just could be more direct about it. Right? But there are alternatives. There is another way. When I was doing this work and giving lectures and talks about it out in public, I happened to be in Canada, and it's always Canada, right? The University of Winnipeg in downtown Winnipeg, in a province, what we call the state of Manitoba, has the largest, what they call First Nation or indigenous population in North America. Urban population. Primarily in the city, working class, working poor, urban. In 2000, there was an explosion in population at the University of Winnipeg, public school. It went from 6,000 students to 10,000 students. But the thing that was important is that it wasn't the traditional student, the white student from the suburbs that came in to teach, came and take classes, and then ran out before sundown. The 4,000 new students were primarily First Nations, what they call New Canadian, i.e. what we call immigrants, working poor, with children, women. And they understood, well, hell, this is the new higher ed world. And it's coming here too. Because, you know, the so-called, what's it called? The cliff, the demographic cliff. That white families ain't having no babies. So what we gonna do, schools, right? So that was already happening in Canada at Winnipeg in 2000. But instead of getting smaller and claiming austerity measures, this school said, you know what, we're gonna lean into the new demographic. We're gonna do higher ed differently, which means that they build buildings like this called the University Downtown Commons. University built residence hall that includes both students and residents at 4 price points. The balcony units are premium, the 13 units are premium, then they have market rate, then they have affordable rate, and then the even more affordable rent geared to income. Because it's a big university, they have the leverage with the province because when you do affordable housing in the state, same thing here, you have limits on the quality of finishes and furniture you can use because they feel like, you know, poor people don't deserve that shit, right? But there, because of their leverage, they said, no, we want the same quality of finishes and furniture in every unit. So when you go into that unit, except for the premium rates for the balconies, every other unit is interchangeable. You don't know if you were in a market rate unit or a rent geared to income unit. And they knew that many people would be working poor and wouldn't be able to afford individual memberships for Wi-Fi. So all the common areas have free Wi-Fi. And they knew that a large portion of the residents would be First Nation, so they retrofitted the ducts in throughout the common areas to allow for indigenous smudging practices. This is possible. This is here, right now. Another way is possible. If you don't know, it's brick cold in Canada, about 9 months out the year. So living inside spaces are high premium. They built a big old new recreational center, like y'all do, right? All the amenities. But instead of keeping people out, they placed it under a community charter, where community organizations are guaranteed prime use of the recreational center in prime hours of the day, not at 7 in the morning and 12 at night. And it's governed by a legally binding charter. This is what's possible, and this is what drove the work that I do at my Smart Cities Research Lab. I'm not gonna go too much in detail, we'll come out of time, but we can talk about it in the Q&A. But real basically, what we do is we research and consult on best practices for building equitable urban communities. As a product of the moment, in the summer of 2020, when we came online, we just thought we would be a cute little liberal arts research sharing database unit on different ways in which universities invest in, don't invest in their communities. A brother had just got out of prison in the Black Bottom in West Philadelphia that's now renamed University City and said, brother, this research is cute, but we need you to get on the ground with us and help us. So we moved from being a data entry, servicing, circulation body to a mean, lean advocacy group that goes all across the country and works with communities to demand greater redistribution of wealth and resources from universities and other wealthy nonprofits. We were successful in New Haven, Connecticut, where we got Yale University to contribute with a kicking and screaming, an additional $52 million in tax compensation over 6 years. We helped do that. Research, humanities folks, social science folks, research did that, or helped do that, alongside of a hellified union, labor union, grassroots community organizing, ground game. But we have a place in this world. That's also entrepreneurship. That's also innovation, the words that have been captured and constrained by our more for-profit oriented colleagues. You gotta rewrite the script. We also did work with pilots. So because of that, we've been asked to go, and by we, I mean me and a couple of undergrads. We've been asked to go all over the country, from Durham, North Carolina, to Baltimore, to Ithaca, New York, to St. Louis, to Rhode Island, to push for payments in lieu of taxes campaigns because these institutions are tax exempt. or various forms of community benefits agreements that are tied to any university developments. For you historians in the room, this is a history class, history's crowd, we've also engaged in this project called the Renewal Project, real quickly. In the 1950s and 60s, talk about slavery, talk about the Morrill Act. But in the height of urban renewal, people don't know that universities became the friendly face of urban renewal. Using the Housing Act of 1949, when it was amended 10 years later, to get a 2-for-1 matching grant for any urban renewal project that was tied to a university. With this money, fully stabilized black and brown communities all over the country were demolished to make way for new campuses or campus expansion. We've uncovered this story all over the country in places ranging from Athens, Georgia to Denver, Colorado, to Minneapolis, to Madison, to St. Louis, and said, okay, we're gonna recover these stories with community members, with faculty and student teams. We're gonna revive the story, we're gonna do the research, we're gonna build out curriculum, we're gonna create place-making projects, and we are going to use this research to call for reparations, to call for repair. In Virginia, last thing, in Virginia, we worked with ProPublica, with this research, to help fund a series of investigative journalist reports about the Shoe Lane neighborhood in Newport News, Virginia, that was demolished to make way for Christopher Newport University in the 1960s. This turned into the report called a series by ProPublica. It became a documentary called Uprooted. You can get it on YouTube. We got the attention of a local state delegate, and now there is a commission calling for, demanding for reparations for the families that were displaced for this university to be built. An investigation into the universities across the state of Virginia to begin engaging in repair. What am I saying here? I'm saying that the quaint notion of the Ivory Tower is dead. Universities are at the center of our political economy, whereby key issues, not just around classrooms or academic freedom, which are important things, but issues around policing, intellectual property, housing, healthcare. The battles being waged for the future of these concepts in our democracy can all be in some way centralized right here. Universities claim to be, and we know even in this amazing Feinberg lecture series, we love talking about social problems somewhere else, right? Violence and warfare in the Middle East, housing inequality in Europe, the integration of immigrants in Northern Europe. But oh, what happens when we take those same skills and turn them back on our own institution? It get quiet up in here, don't it? It get quiet. But that's what we are bound to do. If we are to follow the logic of higher education to serve the social mission of their states, this kind of work is enforcing, encouraging universities to be their best selves based on what they claim to be. And so in that spirit, we can no longer see universities as simply the training ground for the future, but we consider housing and policing and healthcare and labor and rights and free speech and violence and investment. This is not the training ground for the future. This is the staging ground for our current times. Are you ready to join the battle? Thank you.
Well, hello?
Yes.
First off, I want to thank Professor Baldwin for just a phenomenal talk. I think
Thank you.
that really laid out a lot of a lot of the university that in our day-to-day, I know there are a lot of students here and a lot of faculty, that in our day-to-day lives we do not think about and do not see. And Professor Baldwin also showed, I think, in a way that, is often similarly occluded, how deeply rooted the crisis that we face is in deeper historical circumstances. And reckoning with that history is central to the project of imagining something different, which Professor Baldwin ended his wonderful talk by pointing to some different models. And I wanted to maybe begin with a question of my own, and I invite folks who have questions to come up to the mic, and we will kind of have a dialogue, and then I will also be if those who are online want to submit questions. I know a number of folks have already. We will also be asking questions on behalf of you here. I think the question that I wanted to begin with maybe is why is this so hard to see on the day-to-day? Because we all are here, and on the day-to-day we get up, we come to work, we go to class, we see this, we inhabit this institution, and these institutions every day, and as we've just heard, the dynamics that have shaped the present didn't just happen yesterday, right? They've been going on for decades, certainly centuries. And while we might be in a moment where crisis has made them more visible, on the day-to-day we don't think about this. So why do you think that is?
Yeah, great question. So first of all, I just want to say, when we do the Q&A, please, it's not just a recommendation, it's a begging for you to come to the mic, because so people on the internet can hear your questions. So as we're talking, please formulate your questions and don't be shy to come to the mic and have a conversation with us. I might sound angry, but we good. We all good. We fun up here. But anyway, to answer your question more directly, I want to say that the myth of the Ivory Tower is very powerful and alluring. The notion that these are strictly and completely educational institutions does a lot of work, not just in the tax code, but in our notions about who we are and what we do. And while we exist and live under the myth of the Ivory Tower, in many of these institutions, teaching classes and conducting research is the smallest thing we do. For you professors in the room, and I am on the National Council of AUP, and we're trying to turn the ship to make it not just simply a professional clique, but a fighting labor organization with our new slate, Bargaining for the Common Good. Yes, you can clap to that, yes, if you wanted to, that's fine, that's some hard work, y'all, okay? And partially it's because at the foundations of even our so-called oppositional forces, there was an investment in the professional distinctiveness of higher education, right? The idea that, well, we're not just regular workers because we have professional distinctions like academic freedom or shared governance. And our administrative opponents said, after a while, they fought it for a minute, they said, wait a minute, why don't we just give them that? Let them have that. You can have shared governance and academic freedom over there in the corner, right? While we balloon everything else that will make those things less relevant. So they gave us that. And we invested in that as a means of distinguish ourselves from other kinds of labor. And then that became the smallest thing that universities and colleges do, to our detriment. So in my position as AUP, this is one reason why I've instituted this new campaign called Building the New Shop Floor. Taking my research and saying, the shop floor is not just where we teach and where we work in the office. The shop floor is anywhere the university reaches its tentacles. The neighborhoods where we work, the places where we get health care, the corners where we get policed and beat down by campus police or surveilled. Any place where the university is, anywhere where the endowment is, which includes acquiring the water rights in California and in the Brazilian rainforest, some endowments. Anywhere where the university reaches its tentacles is the shop floor. So just be on the lookout. My part of the AUP is building out this new shop floor campaign and targeting particular communities and campuses where we can build out a fighting vision to reclaim higher ed. And I want to mention that, we'll talk about that later, about abolition and reclaiming higher ed, because the point that I'm making is that these spaces are ours. Say are ours. Say it with me. They're ours. They're ours. We need to reclaim these spaces. I get when we see what we're dealing with, we're like, fuck this, I'm done. Burn it down. But we do so at our own peril. We can talk about that more in a minute, but they are ours. Because there's so much going here that's only possible because of our public dollars and because of our public consent. So, yeah.
So I think we will go to audience questions.
Sure.
And if you wouldn't mind just saying briefly who you are, and we'll look forward to your questions. So please.
Hello.
Hello.
Thank you so much, Professor Baldwin, for such a powerful discussion of
Thank
something
you.
so relevant. I am Professor Patterson. I'm a professor in the English department.
Yes.
I want to share that I think the humanities are really important. Divisions in the humanities are a very important mediator in this discussion because we don't bring in a whole bunch of grant dollars usually. And we are bringing a lot of intrinsic value, I think,
Yes.
to the
Cultural
university.
capital.
Yes,
Yes.
in ways that help mediate these sort of tough conversations, particularly because what we do is articulate the ways in which there are complex relations between complex beings,
Yes.
and that this is the struggle of our time, right?
Yeah.
How to be here together as
Right.
different people.
Right.
And I do think that part of our project is to groom good behavior
Yeah.
for the project of tense conversations.
Sure.
Because we want everybody to be okay
Right.
after we argue, right?
Right. Right.
And debate.
Yeah.
So in that way, I do believe in some ways what you call the knowledge economy,
Yeah.
where we live and work and play, and that it could be good,
Yeah,
right? That
sure.
we do want a safe environment,
Right.
again, so we can have tough conversations
Right.
while trusting ourselves to also behave well.
That's right.
And to some capacity, that's important for the
Yeah.
safety of it.
Yep.
So I guess I just want to hear a little bit more, maybe your response on this idea about how the humanities is a mediator in this conversation, how we are trying to rescue us from the harrowing behaviors of,
Yeah.
like in the industrial complex that does exist
Sure.
here. And I say this with a whole bunch of love because I too have tried a reparations project and got booted out
Of course.
because the project is always cool when it's across seas, as you mentioned.
Yeah.
The project is always cool when it is across the country and
Yeah.
you're reading about it in
Yep.
New York Times.
Right.
And it's not so cool when someone's trying to do it right here.
Amen.
Okay, so I just wanted to put, so if I hope you still heard the question about
Of course. Yeah, I
how
got you.
humanities is a mediator
Yeah.
and how we are trying.
Say there. So I'm just say that I see it. There's two sides of that. There are ways in which the humanities and social sciences get deployed by universities to provide cover
That's true.
for the work that they do. Say, oh, but we do these other humanistic things all the time. But at the same time, we are the critical edge in the humanistic and the human scale vision. If you didn't see that, I went fast through it, but the key fulcrum of my lab is looking at smart development beyond just simply statistics and tech and saying we have to do development at the human scale.
Yeah.
That's a humanities argument.
Yes.
And we know that if we're going to have any form of sustainability on this earth, any form of equity in the society, we have to have human scale analyses,
Yes.
which can only be delivered by the humanities and social sciences. But it also requires us to say that we need to have different definitions of innovation. We're innovative, right? Yeah. My lab is innovative. It's humanities driven. We are creating new visions and concepts and blueprints and worldviews that are actually going to save us from ourselves. But it ain't profitable. It's not profitable in the current calculation. It's profitable in the multiple century scale. But we have to steer the ship back to that kind of rendering. Just real quickly, I'll say that if we go back to use history again, the kinds of things I'm talking about in my lab don't come out of nowhere. They're rooted in black studies. In 1967, 68, 1970, it was students and faculty who built out black studies, and it didn't just mean diversifying faculty and diversifying curriculum. They were calling for neighborhood housing on campuses. They were calling for the end of university encroachment on community lands. They were calling for prison annexes for incarcerated residents on the south side, on the west side of Chicago. This was humanities work. This was social sciences work. So I just want to just throw love, not just humanity more broadly, but specifically black studies and ethnic studies in these formations. So thank you for your question.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Karen, do you?
Thanks, Ashish. You sure you don't want to look at who's online asking questions? Okay. Kieran Asher, Women, Gender, Sexuality Studies. You did mention the word racial capitalism.
Yes.
You did mention the fact that corporatization is not new. So I'd like to expand on two elements of racial capitalism and accumulation by dispossession. One is imperialism, because land-grant universities were about actually
Imperial expansion.
And to go into tropical crops, right? Most of the crops that we use today are basically tropical crops that were agricalized, right?
Right.
And the other part is social reproduction that depends very much on racial and gendered labors.
Yes.
So as a professor of women, gender, sexuality studies, and a former biologist, I wanted to talk about imperialism, the non-human, and gender in the accumulation by dispossession that has been going on for a long time and is taking on a new incarnation today.
Right. So so Craig Wilder is great on this, because at the founding of this settler colony, everywhere there was a military command post, there was what? There was a university. So in the Northeast, as they were colonizing indigenous folk, the idea of the university was to, number one, keep the drunken, wild colonial subjects in line, meaning from Britain, and to educate the First Nations people into being colonial subjects in this lands. That's continuing to this day. We talk about the Moral Land Grant Act. It's continuing to this day. We talk about the origins of American studies in Latin America during the Cold War. It's continued in terms of scholasticide in Gaza. This continues. And then in terms of the management of black and brown and women bodies, I could talk for days about who's on the front lines of labor at these institutions that are exploited. It's primarily black and brown women, particularly in food service, administrative assistants, in the labs, nurses' assistants, all these things. Most exploited, most vulnerable, most often shot by campus police. This dynamic has gone out and blown back in a range of ways that underwrite the corporate and capital extraction of value that's being produced by the university. It's happening right here on these campuses all the time. Just as a real core point, when I was in Baltimore, Maryland, talking to workers at Johns Hopkins Hospital, black and brown women, they were telling me that because the university employs on a 9-month cycle, they have full-time jobs and yet are still eligible for public assistance. But what does that do? That kind of labor exploitation underwrites the prosperity of these buildings of tower and steel and the building cranes that we see always propped up to demonstrate that universities are prosperity engines. That prosperity doesn't come from just nowhere. It comes from the hyper-exploitation of labor value underwritten by racial and gender difference. Right on these grounds, every day.
I want to go to...
She's shaking her head. She's like, it's not a debate. We can talk about it later, but, you know.
No, it's not a debate. It's a partial answer.
Yeah.
Over to you.
Well, let's go to a question, and then we'll come back to the in-person from from the Zoom. And if you are watching on Zoom, please continue to submit questions. One question comes about university administration.
Yeah.
What is the role of the middleman or university administration in this new configuration?
Mm-hmm.
How do faculty, especially those trained in critical theory, shift identities, take their place as brokers, and as administrators in this new order?
Yeah.
And I mean, I think I would just add, and I think this is in the spirit of the question.
Yeah.
One approach that faculty especially have taken to this is to move into administration.
Yeah, sure.
What are the opportunities there? What are the problems with that?
Yeah. I'm gonna be honest, the opportunities are very few.
Okay.
Because once you move into that administrative space, your job is to manifest the designs and interests of the institution. Your personal, say your racial or gender diversity becomes a prop for manifesting the idea of democratization. But as my good colleague Ruha Benjamin reminded us online, black faces in high places are not going to save us. How are you being deployed? Am I saying that all ministers are corrupted? No, I'm saying it's very difficult to work outside of the infrastructure and logic of the institution when you occupy that space because, number one, most directly, you are being isolated from your base, your co-faculty. And your interests are turned away from faculty and towards the institution, more in terms of its leadership, in terms of its economic designs.
And it's that difficulty, right, that I think when we put good people in bad positions,
Right.
what we don't acknowledge, right, is structure, right?
Yeah.
That's the hardest thing.
So then your neutral ambitions for promotion, for accolades, for acknowledgement, are all governed by the values of the institution. Right? But there are these clandestine spaces. I'm not saying I'm uncompromised, but I purposely chose to build out my own lab as a way to do administrative work without being an administrator. And so you have these clandestine spaces, and I'm learning from people like Stuart Hall and the Birmingham School, the Center for Contemporary Culture, for Cultural Analysis, that you can have these laboratories and centers that still are fighting and are not fully uncompromised, but can kind of do the work of administration without being administrators. So that's been my effort to do this work, but it's not wholesale, there's no guarantees, but it's another battlefront. But when you are doing administrative work and you are trying to dutifully be acknowledged and be promoted and be acknowledged and gain leverage, you are doing so on someone else's terms.
Please.
Hi, my name is Ava Harrington. I'm a junior social thought and political economy major here.
Okay.
So,
All right.
my question is kind of centered around, I think, within the university space, a lot of this acknowledgement of imperialism, I think, has kind of come up with the ongoing genocide in Gaza.
Yeah.
And that's been accompanied with these ideas of demanding divestment from the school, but a big part of that is also disclosure, which in my experience has been, in some ways, forgotten and left by the wayside, where they turn into like these kind of nebulous ideas.
Yeah.
What exactly does it mean to divest or disclose?
Yeah.
So my question to you is, do you have any recommendations for students in formulating disclosure demands to offer like a more encompassing view of like the money in, money out that you're discussing?
Yeah, it's a great question.
Here?
And I will say that I was so happy with the Disclose and Divest movement that was triggered by Gaza because it revived things that I've been saying for 20 years. Right? About endowments, about where the money is. We've been talking about for years, most of the endowment is put in money market accounts. Take some of that money and put it in community serving financial institutions. Something simple. Take an additional, the schools are required to spend 5% of their endowment to maintain that additional tax exemption on top of the property tax exemption. Spend an additional 3% on community serving projects. Schools went apeshit when we recommended that. But the endowment's supposed to maintain the lifeblood of the institution for its entirety. The endowment's supposed to be here for an emergency. You mean like now? Right? So the point that I'm making is that if a Disclose and Divest project on campus is not myopic or internal, but expands to include issues like property taxes or community serving institutions, you can build a much broader base of push around, say, local trade organizations in construction or plumbing, school teachers, property, homeowners, students, small businesses that take on the burden. If you have a broader vision of disclosing divest that traces all the ways in which these monies impact their communities, you will be the majority. And you could push in ways that would be much more revelatory and powerful.
Sorry, could I just follow up really quickly? So my question, I completely agree. I think this is something that people have been thinking about because a lot of students realistically are thinking, what do I have to do? The SJP people are coming about disclose and divest because they care a lot about Palestine.
Right.
This impacts literally anyone that lives here that pays tuition. So I guess my question is, do you have recommendations on how to start building that base or ways to examine or question the university beyond just protesting or organizing within these smaller spaces?
The important thing is that you are students. You can turn, and because of the corporate model, you're also seen as consumers, right? That consumption is exploitative, but it also has some power. You can say, because I am a consumer, a tuition-paying student, I need access to what? Your financial records. Turn that into an independent study with the group of your students and start doing forensic analysis and accounting about where the money's going. Get together with some econ students and some business students and start doing the work, doing the research, and start doing some power mapping, locating these numbers on data visualization schemes. Get with some artists and some graphic design students and start placing it on data visualization maps and show the reach of the university and use that to base build and organize. I'm gonna give you some organizing tips now. Get with the labor unions and start organizing and do some door knocking and some political education and some tabling and start building out a project. Get with your journalism students and put together some press releases and circulating these ideas in student media, on podcasts, and local press, and start building a political campaign.
Okay, thank you.
Go ahead.
Hi, I'm Jeremy. I'm a mechanical engineering and philosophy student. And one of the big ways that UMass Amherst or I guess some colleges in general, market higher education is as an investment.
Yes.
You invest your money and time, and what comes out is a career.
Yeah.
So I guess my question is, should we, in our effort to reclaim the institution as ours, should we be trying to move away from the powers of industry and corporatization as an influence on higher education and more towards this higher education as this bastion of knowledge?
Yeah.
And how should we do that?
Yeah.
Is the best way student protest?
Yeah.
Or should we be seeking external help?
Right. I mean, there's a couple of things. This is a great question, all great questions. But while the liberal arts are extremely limited, and to be in liberal arts college, you got to be extremely wealthy at $80,000 a year. One of the key elements of a liberal arts college, and I think they sell this same idea in the honors college here, is that higher education cultivates the whole person. It's bigger than just simply careers. Now, we know some of that's marketing, but it's also true that it has the capacity to do that, and there might be a desire to return to that. But I'm very reticent about return narratives, return to the good old days when it was about creating the whole person, because we're in a new climate. So what I will say as well is that we also have some other kinds of leverage. Because while universities lose their shit and are happy to be at the table with industrial partners, we don't always recognize our actual leverage at those tables. It's not just that we should be happy to be in conversation with industrial partners and get their money. But these industrial partners, as I was saying earlier, they understand the ways in which these institutions have become shelters. Financial shelters, image managers. And so what we need to start saying and demanding is that if industry is going to get in bed with us, that they don't steer the ship. That being in partnership with us means that our values must dictate the conversation and the outputs. And so therefore, if we're going to have DEI statements in the North, and social justice initiatives, and state charters, and 10-year mission statements, those values cannot just shape the classroom. They also have to shape these partnerships. So if you're going to be a real estate developer, it takes advantage of the sheltering that comes with partnering with the university. That means that then 30 or 40% of any units you build must be at affordable rates for long-time residents. This is the kind of creative leveraging we can deploy in the moment. That's not just as a romance narrative, but going back to creating the whole person, but dealing with the hard scrabble politics of the present, right? If we're going to partner with an engineering firm, for example, and they're going to benefit from being partnered with the university, the values of the institution must watch over that firm and govern it, because that partnership triggers the kinds of tax and federal dollar contributions that that engineering firm gets by being partnered with the university. The university got to stand up and be who it claims to be and say, if you're going to partner with us, we need to be our best selves, and who we are needs to dictate the terms of these arrangements. But we are weak. We suckers. We got to be stronger. We have to be better. We have way more power than we acknowledge or see, if that makes sense.
Okay. One thing I wasn't quite clear about is just how exactly, as I'm like a freshman undergrad student.
Sure.
How, I don't know, what is the best way to stand up for those values, to
Sure.
make administrators and other people, like, I don't know, administrators in like the career offices, for example.
So when they get that that organizing team together, and they do a study group that I talked about earlier with the young woman, right? And they're building out a political campaign. And I said, get together with the journalism students and the econ students and the humanities students and the mechanic and the engineering students and start doing some analysis on these buildings and grounds. Can turn your research into action, right? You're here to learn, make it applied learning. Use this community as your laboratory, and you'll have an education you never could have imagined.
So we have about 5 minutes left. So why don't we, if folks could keep their questions short, I think we'll stick with
And I'll be briefer as well.
I'll be as brief as possible. I'm a history professor as well. My name is Claire Gillis. I teach at a variety of regional institutions, and that leads me to say, I'm one of your glorified Uber drivers of higher ed.
Yeah.
And my question for you is just pretty simple.
Yeah.
Like, what is the best thing that somebody like me, all of 70% of us who are teaching, what can we do? And do you see the solution for contingent faculty as being opening up more tenured lines of something, or stronger labor unions?
Stronger labor unions, definitely.
Yeah,
Tenure's not going to save us.
been my
And part of our new AUP formation is partnering with Higher Education Labor United, HELU, as a way to break away from what AUP has been, is only concerned with tenure track faculty, while 70% of our ranks are non-tenure track, and saying that we have to have wall-to-wall labor organizing, what I'm calling the new shop floor, or even those small privileges that we have as tenure faculty will mean nothing if we don't organize the base, which is all of us. Yeah, it's got to be organized labor. That's the only way forward.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Thanks.
Please go ahead.
Hello. First, I just want to plug for all the students and faculty here. UMass Dissenters is I think probably one of the largest student organizations fighting for university divestment from war profiteering companies. And we've done a lot of campaigns the last couple of years. Definitely look us up on Instagram, come to meetings. We're trying to get Raytheon out of UMass. And we got them out of the career fair last year because they were so annoyed by us. So definitely get involved with that.
Thank you.
I'm an undergraduate studying youth liberation and children's rights, and I'm just wondering what you think about the continuity between K through 12 education and universities, and the way that, like, if there's a potential for students to reclaim their education away from, profit and innovation.
I'll just say real quickly that one of the first places that began, after George Floyd and Breonna Taylor were killed, and campuses began talking about campus police abolition, I was on the front lines of that. It was actually K through 12 teachers and activists that got cops off their campuses first, right? They were the first ones. And so I say that to say that there are lots of overlap. While we as faculty want to distinguish ourselves from public school teachers, there's lots of overlap when we look at the broader political economy. And so I'll just say real quickly, I'm not going to answer that question fully, but come back to the series when Jesse Hagopian, who was an amazing K through 12 teacher from Seattle, Washington, will be here as a part of this series, and he will break it down for you We were just on a panel together this weekend in Chicago. So come back and get that question answered more fully than I ever could.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So we have maybe time for just one more quick question.
I'm going to be quick. I'm
Okay,
going to be really
great.
quick. Okay. So I've become extremely dissatisfied with my fellow STEM majors becoming super complacent with just their return on investment.
Yeah.
And like being really like just satisfied with just that.
Right.
And I would really want to know, what can I say to them? What is something that I could say that kind of helps them let it sink in?
Right. That if you actually were organized and understand the larger landscape, you would get even a bigger return on your investment, right? If you were organized and you started organizing saying, wait a minute, so if I work directly for that company, I would get a raise with every research discovery, but because I'm a graduate student, I get the same stipend? That's unjust. And especially women who are sexually harassed in laboratories, and the only tribunal is a coalition of other faculty, male faculty, that's exploitative. The exposure to chemicals in these laboratories is exploitative. What are you losing in order to gain this minuscule return on investment that could be even larger if you were organized, safe, and just as a collective body? That's what I would try to start saying. See what happens.
I'm going to start that. Thank you.
Thank you for the question.
Thank you.
Thank y'all.
Well, I want to thank everybody for coming and to say that and to also thank everybody out there on Zoom, and to remind everybody who's here that books are available for purchase, and that Professor Baldwin is available to sign them and to continue the dialogue.
And while it's not my thing, follow me on Twitter. We can have a conversation in the internet town square as well. Sorry.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And speaking of continuing the conversation, I want to remind everybody that the Feinberg series will be continuing. This is the first of a number of events that we're going to be hosting, including the next one on October 9th on restorative justice and repair in academia. We're also hosting open classroom days in conjunction with the courses that we're running, and I encourage everybody to check out the Feinberg series website for more information on all of the events. And with that, I want to thank everybody right now, both here and on Zoom, for coming to this wonderful talk, and especially to thank Davarian Baldwin for a really just phenomenal, amazing, and powerful, and I think I will also say inspiring vision of how we might envision a better university. So thanks.
Thank you much. Thank you.